Welcome back to tutorial number 3 of the Visual Studio 2013 and C# programming, where we're building a simple WPF application. And let's go ahead and get back to where we left off. When we left off, we pretty much had our whole interface for what we want the user to see and how we want it to look. Although there are other things we could have done with alignment and things like that, but for now this should be fine. But let's go ahead and run this application. Now there's several ways you can run the application. You can use the debug, start debugging, or you could use this F5 as a shortcut, or you can use this start. Now for me, I prefer using the start. I just kind of slide up and press start. So let's see what this looks like. Now here's our window, which is very simple, but our title, the WPF Hello World, select a message option and then press display. We provide the two options that they can do and the display. Now when you hit the button or you do any of these check marks, of course they're not really going to do anything, or I should say radio buttons, they're not going to do anything because we haven't written the code, and that's what we're going to be working on next. Now I want to point out, notice that when you set up a window, there is an area that basically the manual setting for the Windows Start location. If you look in your properties window or the properties of the window, there's a setting that says Windows Startup Location. That Windows Startup Location is defaulted to manual, but each time that you open the application, Windows is going to put it where it feels like putting it, and it could be moving around, which is fine because you never know what somebody's going to do. But I have a preference. I like to open it up in the center screen. So I just chain that selection, and when I changed that selection, it added in that part of it into the definition of my window, Windows Startup Location Center Screen. So now I know that each time that it starts up, no matter what computer it's on, it's going to open up in the middle of the display for the user to look at. I just kind of do that. There are other settings that we're going to talk about later on in further tutorials, but for this one, let's just do that. I'm going to press start after again, and notice we also have a couple other things that are going on here. So now right in the center every time, and you don't have to worry about it. Next, let's get to coding. So the question is, what do we want this thing to do? Well, obviously we want it to display something because we have a button that says display. So when the user opens up the window and he looks at this, he says, oh, he's told to select. So he's going to select one of these two things, and based on what he selects, he's going to then press the display button, and we're going to have some action that we want to do. So let's look at what our next step is. There's a couple ways to go here. You can take the button and simply double click on it, and it will create an event handler in the main window.xaml.cs file, which will be an event handler down here. We'll see the event handler in a minute, but that would be one way to create one automatically for you. The other way is that while the button is selected, you can go into properties, and there's a little icon here in the properties area that is now going to provide you a list of events or actions that can cause something to happen. In our case, it's going to be a click event. When that button gets clicked, we want it to do something. So we can double click over here in this area, and it will also create an event handler for that button. But typically, I think most people and most programmers will simply select the button and double click on it. So let's go ahead and do that now. Double click on the button. Oop. Double click on the button. And I will get it eventually. Double click on the button. And we are sent over to the main window.xaml.cs file, and it has created a button click event. Also, if we click back on to our layout area, if we look down here now in our button definition, it has added the click event into that definition, telling us that there is a click event associated with that button. So back over into our code. In our code, what do we want to do now? Well, being that we're coding, we have several items that we have. The first thing is that when it displays, we want it to display something. So how do we display something? Also, depending on the application, but for this one, we're simply going to display a message box. And if you start typing message box, you'll notice that the IntelliSense brings up this list of items that are related to what you're typing. Now, this is a powerful tool because it allows you to do things without making spelling, mistakes, and it helps you guide, or it helps to guide you through your code when you're trying to create something. So with the message box selected, we can simply just press the enter or return button, and it now establishes that what we want to have happen is the button will click, and then there's going to be a message box that's doing something. What you do after the message box is up there is press dot, and now you get a new window. Well, in our case, of course, we're going to want that message box to show. So the button will click, the message box will show, it will say something on there, whatever we want it to be. But for now, with the show highlighted as it is here, just press enter or return, whichever it is, and then parentheses. Now with the parentheses, you notice we've done this, and even if we end the line with a semicolon, which is, okay, this is the line, the code is done, we still have a red. And the reason for that is we haven't provided it the information of what we want to show. So inside the parentheses, we're simply going to do two double quotes, which means inside that we're going to provide the text that we want to be displayed. In this case, we're going to say, when it's pressed, we want to say hello, right? One of the radio buttons was hello. So let's do our hello world. And that would be simply it. At this point, you would have a button click and it would say hello world. And we can try that if you want. Press start and it comes up like this. And when you press the display button, it says hello world. But again, pressing goodbye radio button and then displaying still says hello world. So it's not really providing a selection. It's just simply displaying a message box when you press the display. So we also need something that has the goodbye world, if you will, because that is the other selection. So let's make a message box for goodbye. So again, message box, we can just press enter, dot show. We put in our parentheses and our double quotes and tell it that goodbye world. And then, of course, we have to close out our line of code saying it so that the compiler, when it goes to run this or goes to compile this, it knows that that is the end of the statement that you're trying to do. I want a message box. I want it to show. I want it to say goodbye world. That's it. Let's talk about the next item. So here we go. We have our two message boxes, and we can run our program again at this point. And what do you think will happen? We simply had code that said when you press the button, here's two message boxes. So when we press it, hello world is going to come up, and then goodbye world right behind it, because that's exactly what we told it to do. We said when our button is clicked, show a message box. When that message box gets closed, show another message box. But we don't really want that. What we want is to be able to select how we want the message box to display based on some user input, and that user input is selecting a radio button. So how are we going to do that? We're going to have to use an if statement, and the if statement is going to say if this button is checked, then do this. If this button is checked, then do that. And in its simplest form, that's what we're doing. We're providing us the aspect of deciding between which action or which display we want it to do based on the action of the user. So let's start with that. So if we're going to now put parentheses, and inside that we have to identify if something, right? Well, if, remember we named our radio buttons, button 1 RB, button 2 RB. So we're going to say, and there it goes. See, the IntelliSense brings up even what you created, but that is the identifier. So we want button 1 RB, and then dot, what do we want that? If it is checked, right? We want to know if it's checked. So if it is checked, that identifies what we're trying to go. And then equal equals. This means is this true? Is it equal to this? And we're going to say, is it true? Because if it was checked, it would be true. So that's what we are trying to find out. We want to know if the radio button 1RB is checked as being true. And if it is, what do we want to do? We have something that we need to put inside here. And that is if radio button 1 is checked. So we're going to put this message box, I just cut and paste in there. But we're going to say hello world because radio or button 1 RB is the hello radio button. Now, if it's not true, we can just say else, which means if that's not true, then it's going to be something else going on. And we'll give an area for code if something else is going on. Well, what would be that something else? Well, the something else would be, again, if the other button is clicked, because it is possible, if you remember when we opened our program, neither one of the checkboxes started out being checked, or neither one of the radio buttons started out being checked. So it is possible that neither one would be checked. So again, let's check if the second one is. So else, check if the other one is. And there's several ways to do this, but we're going to do it this way for right now. So if, again, the button 2RB dot is checked, equals true. So now we have our statement that checks if that is true. And in here, if it is true, what's our action? We want the message box, in this case, to be displayed and say, goodbye world. But remember, we said that it is possible that neither one is checked. So at that point, we can also say else, give ourselves an area to work, and how about we just say a message box that says you did not make a choice. So message box dot show you did not make a choice. And then close that line out with the semicolon. So why did we do it this way? Well, here's what it is. When you're writing an application, you want to think about all the possibilities because you don't want your application to try to do something that you did not account for. For instance, what would happen if we didn't have this else and they pressed the button and neither one was checked? Well, it wouldn't really do anything. And we don't want to leave the user going, well, what the heck? I pressed the button and nothing happened. This takes care of that. Okay, so let's run the program here. Now it comes up. We press hello, display, it says hello world. We press goodbye, display, goodbye world. Our program is working correctly. Excellent. Sorry, I'm rushing a little bit, but now without them selected, we display that and you did not make a choice. So our program is running exactly the way that we want it to run. And we can now close out the program. We have our code, and that would be the end of this tutorial number 4 of the Visual Studio 2013 and C# programming. See you later. Actually, tutorial 3.